Thank you, Sharona, and I want to thank your husband, Dr. Farzam, as well. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this beautiful occasion. We haven't had this big an audience for quite a while. And first of all, I want to apologize if I'm not being very lucid and dynamic tonight. I had a very troubling situation at work this afternoon. You get all sorts of weird phone calls when you're a rabbi. A guy from Texas moved in and asked to see me. He comes into my office, tells me he wants to bar mitzvah his dog. So, I'm Israeli. I don't beat around the bush. I told him, what do you mean bar mitzvah your dog? Are you crazy? We don't do these things here. Get out of here. And then he told me he just sold his oil company and he wants to make $100,000 donation. So I immediately said, oh, you didn't tell me the dog is Jewish. So I'm gonna try one more joke. By the way, giving a joke at the beginning of a rabbinic discourse is they teach you in rabbinical school. It's good to start a sermon or a class either with a joke or a story. We all want a good story. That's why we go to the movies, for example. We all enjoy jokes, and we open up like a flower if it's a good joke. There was a great rabbi in the Talmud called Rabbi, actually. A great rabbi who would always say...
This class will continue in 10 seconds. This class will continue in a few seconds now.
He would always crack a joke at the beginning to get everybody into the right mindset. So I'm going to tell one other last joke, and that joke will connect us hopefully to the theme, which is the story of the rabbi and the cantor and the president of the synagogue standing before the open ark in the Torah scrolls on Yom Kippur, on Ne'ilah, the holiest time of the year. And they're all beating their chest and saying, I'm nothing, like nothing before God, I'm nothing. And suddenly they hear all the way at the back of the synagogue this very little guy going like, I'm nothing. And the rabbi turns to the cantor and the president and says, look who thinks he's nothing. So we all want to be something, or we all have certain innate human needs. Abraham Maslow, who was a great Jewish American psychologist, a great social psychologist, famously had his hierarchy of needs. So the basic needs that we have are physiological and physical needs, right? We need a roof over our head, we need food and drink and physical safety. And then we have other needs, including emotional needs. What are emotional needs? For example, we all know, but one example is Oprah, I mentioned in one of our previous classes, was once asked, what have you learned from your show? You have met people from all walks of life, from heads of states and billionaires to the utterly impoverished homeless people. What have you learned? And she said, I learned that everybody has a story and everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be heard. And we all know from child psychology that when infants and children are not seen and heard, even in infancy and early childhood, and there's no emotional attunement to an infant, to a toddler, this has emotional negative ramifications for life. Right? So, one of my rabbis in New York, I was in New York in January, I met him, he's 80 now. I remember the first time he spoke with us in rabbinical school, and he said something pretty unique. I never heard anybody say that. Have you ever met someone for the first time in a forum of 40 and 50 people and hear that person say, I want to be loved? It's kind of a very vulnerable thing to say. Well, that's what Rabbi Libo said, he's a great rabbi from New York. We all have a need to be loved, and to be recognized, and to be seen. So the topic of tonight's class is living without fear of what other people think. So we all have this human need that makes us human, to be well thought of, and to be respected, and to have a respectable standing in community, in society. But on the other hand, if we become too obsessed with that need or what we want other people to think about it, we can become prisoners of that need to be well thought of for others. Right? So there are two things going on here, right? One is we have that need to be well thought of and to be accepted, and the other one is how do we achieve that need without forfeiting what philosophers, forgive me, called authenticity, being real, not kind of effacing your true self, the person you are, the person you want to be. So interestingly enough, anybody knows what is the name of the chief halachic code, the most important book in Jewish law, which came out in the 1500s? Shulchan Aruch, thank you. It's a three-pointer right there, nothing but net. By Rabbi Joseph Caro, a great Sephardic sage. And the Shulchan Aruch starts with two words in Hebrew. Ka'ari, which means like a lion. Yitgaber, shall overcome. A person shall overcome as a lion. Ve'itiyatzev la'avadat haboreh, and will summon oneself up to serve God. So what does it mean to overcome as a lion? To overcome what? So some of it is just to press snooze on your iPhone and not go to synagogue or not do this or not do that. Overcome inertia, laziness. But actually, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, who is the Ashkenazi commentator on Rabbi Caro, says, Shelo yityareh min hamal'igim alav, that a person should not be afraid of those who mock him or her. So the first the most important book in Jewish law and how to live Jewishly starts by saying, don't be afraid. And the commentator says, don't be afraid of what? Of those who might make fun of you. Right? So our sages are well attuned to the fact that we can kind of hold ourselves back and not live the life that we really want to live because we're kind of hijacked by what a French philosopher called Jean-Paul Sartre, 20th century, called in French le regard. Le regard is the gaze, G-A-Z-E, the look. There's like the societal look. There's like, you know that society is looking at you. It's like an invisible look. What are people going to say? How are they going to react? So the first commentary and the most important work of Jewish living says, don't be afraid of those who might make fun of you. How can we not become hijacked to that societal gaze that people expect us to live a certain life? I mentioned many times that there's a book that's a very powerful book. I mentioned it, I think, in like maybe 4 or 5 sermons by now, called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, by an Australian nurse in palliative care, and people on their deathbed, and patients who are terminal. And throughout the years, she saw that there were certain recurring themes of people who pass away, either in young age or advanced age, that they lament. Things that they haven't done in the handful of decades that God has given them. And what's the most popular, so to speak, regret that people tend to have, confided in her? I wish that I had the courage to live the life that I really wanted to live, and not the life that others expected me to live. Any reactions to that? Doesn't have to be personal. Do you find it surprising? Do you think that it makes sense that we all live in a pressure cooker of a society that expects you to mold yourself into a certain kind of cookie cutter kind of life? Anybody wants to say something about that? Yes, sir.
I think that's a very powerful statement, because it's not just regretting that I didn't buy that house or take that job. It's a whole lifetime of regret. That's a very sad statement.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that one of the main reasons seems to me perhaps that God has given us the Torah and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is that we don't live on autopilot our entire life and then in advanced age suddenly have this shell shock kind of realization. I think that the shofar that we hear, let's say on Rosh Hashanah, is like a gong at the end of a boxing ring. another round is over. Think about, we have lived X rounds, how many more rounds do we have? So we have these opportunities for accountability. What are we doing so that it doesn't meet us by surprise in such a tragic way that apparently a lot of people do?
I don't agree with that statement, actually. I think it's a very...
Now we're having a Jewish conversation. This is like the Talmud, thesis, antithesis.
I think it's a very naive statement because we don't live in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. All of us are either married or children of parents or something like that. The reason we don't do a lot of things is because we know that there's some kind of consequences to our action. Mm-hmm. We don't live in a vacuum. Yeah, I would love... As a matter of fact, perfect example, we went on a vacation to Rio de Janeiro, and I wanted to go on one of those things that you just fly without any motor and you just go down. I was dying to do that. That was one of my dreams, to go down on Rio.
Don't take me with you.
Yeah. She came to me and she stopped me. She said, "Listen, you don't live alone. You have a family. You have kids." Yeah. So it's a naive statement to see that
Well, I want to say to both your comments that the rabbis have a term for this. Your views are complementary. They're complementing and adding to one another. They're not contradicting one another. So in this case, the Talmud would say, "Ele ve'ele, hey Sharona, divrei Elokim chaim." These and these are the words of the living God. On the one hand, we don't want to just be subservient to the rat race and catch up with ourselves in advance. They're saying, where did my life go? I was only dealing with the material aspects of life. And on the other hand, we don't live in a vacuum. Or in the words of a great English medieval mystic, John Donne, no man is an island, right? No person is an island. So, there's one of Israel's leading writers today, Amos Oz, he says that compromise, like between husband and wife, compromise is a synonym for life. But, I have in my notes later on to say that the sages ask, does God have a stamped seal, metaphorically speaking? So the answer is, anybody knows? God does have a stamped seal, and it's the Hebrew word emet, which means truth. But if you look at the word emet, the first letter is aleph. It's the very beginning of the alphabet. The last word is taf, it's the end, and the mem is kind of in the middle. So truth can be found in what Maimonides and the Greek philosopher Aristotle called the golden mean of moderation. On the one hand, maybe we don't want to be completely slaves to societal opinions and dictates and just efface ourselves so everybody... That would be one extreme. On the other hand, you don't live in a vacuum. You have relatives, and you do have to be in touch with society. So how do you maintain your autonomy and sense of independence and pursuing your true goals and values in life, but not live in a vacuum? That's a very good point. So Abraham, the first Jew, right? He's not here tonight, but his wife Alfreda is. What was? Oh, and we also have Avram. Yeah, we do have him here. Okay, Avram Aini. All our Abrahams should be well. And what is Abraham's nickname in Judaism? Avraham ha-Ivri. Abraham the Hebrew. Why Ivri, which is Hebrew? From the word ever. Ever means side. Side in Rabbinic Hebrew. So Abraham was on one ever, he was on one side of the river, and the whole world, the rest of humanity was on the other side of the river. Everybody else worshipped the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, the Los Angeles real estate market, stocks, bonds, commodities, and Morgan Stanley. And only Abraham worshipped God. So Abraham is known as the lonely man of faith. Abraham was an iconoclastic figure. He was willing to smash the false idols of his time. Do you know the Midrash, the rabbinic story about the fact that Abraham's father had an idol store called Idols Are Us? and one day his parents went to Palm Springs for the weekend, or some, others say to Santa Barbara, and Abraham was said he'll watch over the store, and when his father came back, all the idols were smashed into pieces, and only one idol had the axe in his hand. And his father asked him, what happened here? What happened to all my merchandise? I'm trying to make a living here. And Abram said, well, they all fought against each other. This one is the only one who survived. And Abram said, Abram's father, Terah, said, what kind of nonsense is that? He said, what kind of nonsense is that? Why are you selling this for people to worship? So, my point is that Judaism is born at a moment in which there is one individual who says a resounding no to the false idols of his time. And we are challenged as heirs of that spiritual and cultural tradition to walk in Abram's footsteps. When we read about Abraham or any other figure in the Torah, this is not just reading history or literature. This is a direct call to me, to you, as individuals, to lead an Abrahamic kind of lifestyle. To be the person who says no to the false idols. And every age has its own false idols. What do you guys think, if anybody wants to share, are some of the prevalent false idols of our time? Hollywood?
Apple.
Okay, so Hollywood is what? A cult of celebrities and external looks, glamour. Okay. And what was the other thing you said?
Apple.
Apple? What about Apple?
Just, Apple's a symbol of luxury, right? So to speak, in a way.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because one of the greatest rabbinic minds of our time, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, says that the late Steve Jobs is like the new Moses. He came down from the mountains of Northern California with a new 2 sets of tablets, right? The iPhone and the iPad. And if you look at all the new gadgets, many of them are called right? First you had the iPod, then the iPad, the iPhone, the iTunes. It's all about I. So many people might say today's Western culture is the culture of me. It's self-worship. So Rabbi Sachs says if an alien from outer space would be an anthropologist, would come here, says these people here, they worship the I, the self, and they even have a religious ritual. And it's not the Shema, it's the selfie. Radical individualism, right? So it's entertaining and very witty, those ideas by Rabbi Sachs, but I think they do capture something of the essence of our times, right? If we think about our parents and grandparents, a lot of us, our grandparents grew up in what the Arabs called chamula. It's like an extended family, everybody supports each other, and now we have much more freedom, but we're much more isolated. It's a separate discussion. It's not today's class, but a discussion. But we see that every age has its own false idols, right? So materialism, status, image culture, me, my career, right? So these kinds of things. So this whole thing about living without fear of what other people think of me, which is the type of our class, I want to mention a brilliant conjecture by another Jewish American sociologist called Cooley. Must have been really cool in high school. Cooley. And Cooley says the following. So fasten your seatbelts, follow me. He says the following. He says, you may have heard it before if you come to Sephardic Temple often enough. Cooley says, I am not who I think I am, and I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. In other words, my sense of self-worth is derived from what I think you guys think about me. No. What he's saying is that most people, their sense of happiness about themselves comes from what they think others think about them. If I have a feeling that most people think I'm good and successful, then I'll feel good about myself. And if I think most people think negatively of mine, then I won't be happy. And
How many likes do you get?
Sorry?
How many likes do you get?
Yeah, I really think, guys, that Sharona, this is a very worthy example of today's culture. Personally, I really like Facebook. I've learned new things about people that I haven't seen for 25 years sometimes. And there are a lot of worthy things I find on Facebook. I like to use it as a professional tool. But Facebook is onto something amazing, right? Which is our need to be loved, to be recognized, to be seen, to be liked. Right? There's no getting around it. You know, you get a bunch of likes, you feel good about yourself. So they really kind of, I'm not saying it in a sinister way. I'm not saying Facebook is doing something bad. I think that we can lose our sense of self-measurement and get addicted to getting lots of likes, or get this anxiety you check after an hour. Did I get any likes? Did I get any likes? Maybe I should take it off. You know? So there's something in Nietzsche's words, the German thinker, human all too human, about this whole like kind of situation.
And also showing an image of yourself happier and better than what you really are, so people think that you're that happy person. So have you seen people do selfies? They always smile big. And
Yeah, like life becomes a commercial.
I'm having fun, look
Yeah,
at
yeah.
me. And then you have to check every 5 minutes to see if people liked it.
Yeah, and we're all guilty of it to a certain extent. The question is how obsessed we become with it, because it's something in human nature, right? I think. I can only speak for myself, but
That's why I don't use Facebook.
yeah.
Good for you. But the next generation, I mean, they're born into it.
Yeah.
So we
Well-
may resist, they can.
It's strict, yeah. Well, it's good for business. That's why I'm on Facebook. But I think Facebook can be used for very worthy things. But we spoke about Abraham, who was the first person who wanted to live his own life and not just be not in fear of what other people think, but to lead an independent life in pursuit of what modern philosophers call authenticity. The idea of authenticity in 20th century philosophy is keep it real, be real, right? To be an authentic self, you know. Now, who is another figure in Jewish history that, like Abraham, did not bow down to the false idols of his time?
Moses?
Moses is certainly one example I thought about. You mean Moses Malone? No, Moses from Egypt. I agree 100%. He could have stayed in the palace and lead a very serene lifetime. By the way, sorry?
Lot.
Noah.
Lot, because he left Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah. Lot was a complicated guy, like all of us. The older I get, and I'm still probably the youngest in the room, the more I realize how complicated we are, we human beings.
You're not the youngest in the room. All the women are 29.
Okay.
Alex has scored twice.
that's מגדלת אותו יפה. יפה. Well raised, yeah. So, you're making me look bad. My wife is going to listen to this.
I told you, don't live in a vacuum.
Yeah.
See?
By the way, anybody knows where tennis is mentioned in the Torah? It says Joseph served in Pharaoh's court. But in addition to Moses, like you said, who chose instead of life of a privilege and decadence and a life of holiness, instead of living like a billionaire in the Pharaoh's palace, the Pharaoh was like the North Korean dictator today. But he chose to turn his back on that life of privilege for truth and justice. But we just celebrated on Thursday Purim. So the person I had in mind was Mordechai. He's sitting right there, Mordechai. Mordechai Nikfar, we love you. Right? So Mordechai, what started the whole genocidal situation for Haman? Something really ruined his day, because of which he declared genocide against the Jewish people. Anybody remembers what is that thing that happened that ruined Haman's day, and because of that he wanted to annihilate the Jewish people.
To bow down.
Thank you. Mordechai refused to bow down before him. I alluded several times to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs tonight. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs is a living legend, and he was knighted by the Queen of England. He said that for his mother, it was the greatest thing in the world. She was still alive. He said, I'm going to meet the Queen. But the only thing is, when you're knighted by the Queen, you have to do like a symbolic bow. Now, we don't bow to anybody, right? We say in Psalm 23, Hashem ro'i, the Lord is my shepherd. But no Jew I ever met was a sheep. So he can't bow to the queen. So they put for Rabbi Sachs like a kind of railing that he would gesture to the side as if he's bowing, and then she would knight him. So it was actually, like now, shortly before Pesach. And it was really interesting. The queen was sitting next to her husband, Prince Philip, and when Rabbi Sachs came and with the railing did a slight gesture, he leaned, the queen looked at her husband and said, why is this night different from all other nights? But on a more don't use it at home on the Seder night. Be careful. If you value your in-laws. But Mordechai didn't bow before Haman, and he's the first person that the Bible calls Mordechai HaYehudi. He's the first one who's called a Jew, Jewish. Nobody else, right? Abraham is the Hebrew. We're Bnei Israel. But why is Mordechai, it's a superlative. Why is he called the Yehudi? And the answer is in the Talmud, Yehudi, to live as a Jew, means not to bow before idolatry. Not to bow before the false idols of our time. And Haman was a great example of this. Haman was the vice president of that monarchy. He was very, very wealthy. He was a huge celebrity. So he had tremendous financial power, political power, social power, but he was not exactly the nicest of people and not the most moral of people. And Mordechai was true to his principles. He wouldn't bow down. He wouldn't think of it in a deeper way. He wouldn't kind of sell himself short and undermine his own sense of integrity and values before somebody like Haman. He's not going to sell himself cheap for socioeconomic mobility. Right? It's a very kind of profound idea. And then Haman goes home. He was so upset, actually, Rashi says he Ubered, couldn't even drive. And what does he tell his wife? Kol ze eino shaveli. Everything that I have is not worth it for me. Why? Because Mordechai got from Achashverosh the special, the special horse and the special suit and all that. There was one person who didn't bow down before him, and he couldn't stomach it. So Haman, on the face of it, he's the second most powerful person in the empire. He's super powerful. But look how mentally, emotionally, and spiritually weak he is. One person doesn't bow before him, and he's shattered. He's disintegrated. He's such a slave internally of what other people think of him, that if only one person, Mordechai, doesn't bow before him, he can't function. That's really something, right? It's very telling. So I want to say is that we're heading towards Pesach. We just finished Purim. And on Passover, we're celebrating the Exodus from Egypt. So on the face of it, on the most immediate level, we're going to celebrate liberty, political liberty. We exited Egypt, right? We got out, hence the Exodus. And of course, we're going to think about all the 20th century exoduses. And it's incumbent upon all of us to reiterate to our children and grandchildren that we're also celebrating our exoduses from the Irans and the Egypts and the Polands and the Russias of the 20th century, right? All these different Egypts. But on a deeper level, Pesach is also about working on our exodus today from the things that we are enslaved to today. and the negative patterns that we are enslaved to today. And I think one of the things that we always have to struggle with is, are we enslaved to social perceptions? Are we enslaved to social pressure? Right? We talk ad nauseum about peer pressure for our kids, the teenagers. So I also try to work with them on that in the high school class sometimes. But we also have that issue. So how do we achieve an exodus also from that constant pressure that I think many of us feel to just conform to what the culture around us expects us to do? So I want to conclude maybe by saying the following. Yeah, I think I'll just say that. There's a Hasidic story about a rabbi called Rabbi Zusha. And Rabbi Zusha used to say the following. He said, when the day comes and I'm done with this world, I'm going to be asked on high, Rabbi Zusha, why weren't you like Abraham? So Rabbi Zusha said, I just another guy from Century City. I ain't no Abraham. I'm not going to sweat that one out. And if God is going to ask me, why weren't you like Moses? I'm going to tell him, I ain't no Moses. I'm just Zusha from Century City. But if God is going to ask me, Rabbi Zusha, Reb Zusha, which means Mr. Zusha, why weren't you Reb Zusha? Why weren't you, the real you? Then I'll have a problem. So I don't have a solution. I think we're social creatures. Like Aristotle said, man is a social animal, a political animal. It means a social animal. It's healthy and normal and desirable that we want to be well thought of. The question is the balance between that and kind of effacing ourselves. We have the role models of the Abrahams and the Mordechais are speaking to us to also resist that social pressure and find, I would say, that ever-elusive balance and equilibrium between our basic emotional needs to be well thought of, being part of society, and on the other hand, finding our own true voice and authenticity and true path in life within all those social pressures that we're subjected to. So, these are some reflections from the Torah about an issue that's a very complicated issue. And I think that for us, sometimes, as American Jews, we even live in a smaller community within the greater community that may add even more pressure. So these are some of the reflections that I wanted to offer. And maybe we could take a few minutes if people want to make a comment or ask something. Does that sound good? Yeah?
Sound good.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Okay, great. So, thank you, everyone. Anybody? Did anybody? Not all at once, please.
I'll make it.
Yes, please.
I think first of all, for us to sit here and speak up and talk about what's going on in our mind we're an example of what we're talking about here. What are people going to think to what I say? I'm worried about, if I make the wrong comment, somebody's going to think something wrong of me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example, right?
I think it's a great example. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is that I always say, okay, we're invited to a party, to a bar mitzvah, to a wedding. We get dressed. We want to make sure everything matches. Your hair is perfect, your dress is perfect, your shoes are great. And we're worried about what, we walk into the party and what are people going to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at me, do I look good? Do I look perfect? But you got to think about the fact that everybody who's there has thought of the same thing getting there. They are thinking the same thing as you. Mm-hmm. Everybody's looking at me. So everybody's busy looking at themselves, not the people around them.
Everybody's busy thinking what other people might be thinking of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's...
Right.
There's always a bigger fish.
Right. Absolutely.
It's the same. It's the same thing you're going through. Everybody else there is thinking the same thing. So
So we're
Why-
putting too much thought into
yeah, why do that to yourself? You know, you gotta do it for you and you only.
Well, you know what's the Hebrew word in Rabbinic Hebrew for ethics? Midot. And midot means measurements. Like sizes, as propos clothing. Why is the Hebrew word for ethics measurements? Because everything has to be measured. Yeah, we do want to look good and elegant at a party or a respectable event, but we want it to be measured, right? We're not going to prepare and look in the mirror for 14 hours. So that's something really interesting about Jewish ethics. Yeah, we do care, and probably we should care. We're social creatures, but to what extent?
Exactly.
That's the idea of measurements is, how far are you going to take it? Priorities, how much time you're going to spend. Yes, sir.
It's easy to say, but it's hard to do it, Rabbi. I drive a little Fiat. It's an electric car.
I know
It's
it.
the least expensive car I've ever owned.
It's cute.
It is by far, without a doubt, the greatest car we've ever had. Better than any Mercedes, Range Rover, Lexus. It's the greatest car we've ever had.
But I told you I want you to drive a bigger car because it's just...
But you
For
go to
safety.
a wedding or you
Yeah.
go to a party and they pull up in the Maserati and they pull up in the Mercedes and the valet brings out my little Fiat.
Forget the Maserati, you have forget the Maserati, you have an Osrati.
It's so hard. I've overcome it because you
Yeah.
get to a point where it just doesn't
Yeah,
matter. But it's so hard because they give you that look. Not only the people that are there, but the
Yeah.
valet also.
Yeah.
The valet gives you the look.
Listen, it happened to me.
But it's the greatest car that has ever, you gotta believe me, the greatest car that's ever been made.
I got to tell you, apropos this, when we moved here in 2013, we had our cars...
Are you a Fiat dealer, by the way?
We had our cars driven from the East Coast, and I drive a Hyundai Sonata, and my wife at the time had a Nissan Maxima of blessed memory, and the car, of course. So we used to live at the Churchill, which is one of that's the first place we rented, right up the street from the temple, and my car came, and the valet, it's a valet parking tower. I get there and I was like, hello, sir, there. And my car arrived, would you please park it? And I gave him, and he tells me, this one? And he's pointing at a Beamer. It's like, this one? He's pointing, no, this one. I was like, this one. He says, this one? This one? This one? I'm like, yeah, this one, yeah. But, there is another ideal that I started teaching now on my day off, which is... Monday, my day off. Hello, everyone. I teach rabbinical students. So I'm teaching a class now in Hasidism, which gives a lot of fulfillment to help train future rabbis. And in Hasidism, in Jewish mysticism, there's a concept called hishtavut, from the word shaveh. Shaveh means equal. That everything is equal in my eyes. If somebody thinks I have the best car or the worst car, if somebody thinks I'm really good looking or very not good looking, to kind of find your own inner center and not be unaffected by those external perceptions. I don't really believe that you can get to it totally. We're going back to Aristotle, who said that we are a social animal, and anybody who is not a social animal, says Aristotle, is either a god or a beast. Either is like subhuman or superhuman. So I don't think you can really not care about one cannot really not care about what others think of oneself, but does it completely dictate us? Are we enslaved to it, or can we in Passover also achieve emancipation, not only politically, but also from that cultural kind of, it's an inner dialogue we got to constantly have with ourselves.
Abraham also needed the community. When he was in his tent, he saw 3 people coming. He said, call them, bring them in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
He needed the need for it.
Yeah, he was a community builder.
It's a human nature.
Right. He didn't
It's
want
like food, you need it.
He didn't want to remain he and Sarah the only game in town. Right? He was doing what people call today outreach. right? They opened the first Chabad house in history. Rashi says that Abraham would convert the guys, and Sarah would convert the women, and they would invite people over and try to inspire and empower them to live in a deeper way. Honey, did you want to say something, please?
If we're speaking about not caring about what other people think, on the one end of the spectrum is, I don't care at all what people think, and perhaps the sense of self-centeredness. And on the other, I care so much about what other people think, and it's the sense of halabi, but in English. In Farsi, halabi, meaning I don't want
A people's person?
People pleaser.
A people pleaser. Okay, thank you.
So perhaps there's such a gray area, maybe
Right,
that's the whole point of not neither being the self-centered person.
Yeah.
Neither.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's what I was trying to say earlier when the two of you gentlemen were making complementary points, right? You were saying you can't live in a vacuum, and Alex, do you remember exactly how I'm trying to do justice to your point? You were saying you have to live...
that it's a regret that...
It's a shame that you don't live the life.
Your whole
that you
life,
Right.
that statement is a very powerful statement, that
Right.
your whole life was a regret.
Right, so I guess, that's what I was trying to say with the idea that God's stamp seal, allegorically speaking, of the Hebrew word for truth, emet, that you have two polarities, like Hani said, the polarity of being a people pleaser in Farsi. What was the word again? Thank you. And on the other hand, being somebody who is actually narcissistic to the other extreme, that completely doesn't care about, the social side of things. So finding the balance between the two, it's a continuum. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
So I just want to say something, because I have hired thousands of people. They come for an interview, and then they work, and I can see how they dress. Image does matter. I find the people who dress better, care about themselves, are overall better employees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it goes with the territory sometimes. In other words, if you take care of yourself, it means something.
I agree, but I think you're talking about a value that's not an external, superficial value. If I understand you correctly, you're talking about what we in America call self-care. Self-care is about hygiene, it's about aesthetic, it's about physical and mental health. So self-care is a worthy indicator of what's going on with a person inside, mentally, emotionally. So again, but with a grain of salt, because sometimes you could have people who are really good at projecting an image, and they're very hireable, and then later on, employers can feel very differently.
There are always exceptions, but I'm talking generally.
Yeah, and I agree, and actually, I agree, but I've also seen some notable exceptions to that.
Actually, let me just say something quickly. Something I've experienced as a dentist. Of course, there are exceptions, but most of the time when a patient comes in, they're very well dressed, they have expensive clothes, expensive shoes. When it comes to paying for their dentistry, they don't have money. Usually those who are dressed modestly, they drive like a 10, 12-year-old car. When it comes to the dentistry, they have the money, they don't need to borrow anything, they don't have to pay for the dentist.
I
know.
I have a comment to make.
One more comment.
I have a comment to make. I think this whole concept of the I, it's all about me, is unfortunately hurting our kids. And as you all know, the divorce rate is increasing. And I think part of it is because people are worshiping themselves and not literally going in and saying, am I hurting my kids? It's all about me.
And that's also affecting our society, and which is really sad, because it's all about me. I gotta be happy, and they don't realize, maybe there is 3-4 other kids that are involved, children that are involved here. So I just wanted to make that comment.
No, I completely agree. I think in California it's like 51%.
It's 51?
I
That's it?
think
I
so.
think it's much higher, no?
Higher even?
I've
I don't know.
60.
No, not Jews.
I've read
No, 51%.
Unfortunately, Jews are following.
No, I think this whole concept of having a middle-age crisis, it also comes from people feeling that they haven't lived their lives to the fullest, and
That should
suddenly
be
they
another
want
subject of another lecture.
So actually, there's a prominent American sociologist who published a book in the 80s or 90s called Culture of Narcissism, about contemporary American culture. And one of the leading American sociologists of our time, Robert Putnam from Harvard, wrote a book called Bowling Alone. So there used to be like bowling leagues, and then people started bowling alone, and now probably people just bowl on their iPhones. so we're kind of getting into what some people in the academia call today the atomization of society. Everybody just becomes like a separate, and we're paying a price for it because it's called social capital. Social capital, emotional capital. These are very precious things that we need as human beings, even sometimes more than monetary capital. And I think that's where community comes in. That's where community comes in and gives us something that we cannot acquire in the economic marketplace.
Human interaction is gone.
Right.
I have a question now.
Sure. Who's there? Oh, hi. Yeah.
Going back to modern art,
Hi, everyone. Yeah. Yeah.
We might be in our subject. To your opinion, if he knew the
Yes.
consequences of his action, all of us during our life,
Mhm.
we are confronted with those
Yeah.
issues. Should we have enough faith that say, I go that route, and I don't care that other people are going to get hurt?
Yeah. You're touching upon a very interesting question, which is, had Mordechai known that the consequences of him physically not bowing before Haman could lead to a genocidal decree against the Jewish people, would he still been as obstinate and assertive about not bowing before Haman? So we have here a clash of several Jewish values, but the supreme one is pikuach nefesh, which means when a soul is in danger, right? So if life is in danger, then you should eat on Yom Kippur and you should eat bread on Pesach, whatever it is you need to save a life. And as the Talmud says, he who saved one life, it's as if he saved the world entire, let alone if a person saves an entire nation. So there's certainly something to it, but it's a very difficult dilemma. And very briefly, in 20 seconds, that dilemma was part of the Jewish world in the Islamic lands in the 12th century. In the times of Maimonides, the Mujahideen came to power. The Mujahideen were Islamic fundamentalists. They were the ISIS of the 12th century. And that's why Maimonides had to move from Spain to Morocco, finally through Israel to Egypt, because otherwise they would have told him, either you convert to Islam or we behead you. And the Jews of Yemen were told, either you convert to Islam or we behead you, and the community converted to Islam. And when the Mujahideen lost power, they wrote to Maimonides saying, can we come back home to Judaism? And he wrote a famous treatise called the Epistle to Yemen, and Maimonides told them, you betcha. Of course you can come back to Judaism. So I think it's somewhat connected to your point, that it seems like, according to Maimonides, to save your life sometimes, and to save Jewish continuity, you should certainly be inclined to do things that normally would go against your conscience in order to save your own very existence and the existence of many other people. So, yeah.
That's because Maimonides brought rationality to Judaism.
Yeah, Maimonides was an arch rationalist, that's true. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, friends.
Thank you.
And again, I want to thank Mrs. Alfreda Yazdi, the president of our sisterhood. I want to thank tonight, first and foremost, Sharona and Dr. Ramin for hosting us in their beautiful home. And for opening your hearts and the beautiful spread. And may we all grow in soul together and build even more deeply our friendships for one another and continue to be a wonderful community in Israel. We have a wonderful community and we're also blessed to be part of it. And that's it. Thank you. Have a great night. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Rabbi, thank you.
I'm really glad you came.
I'm glad I came. I really enjoyed it.